All right, good morning. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is the first of 3 webinars for this co-op month of October. Today we'll be focusing on housing co-op startups from idea to reality. My name is Shannon Fuller. I am the cooperative resident organizer at Raise Up Housing Cooperative in Lewiston. I'm joined today by bri.d.eng, Margaret, Jones, and Thumbs, our panelists, who I will introduce in a little while. We also have with us in the background today, Emmy from the Cooperative Maine Business Alliance and John Crane from Portland Food Co-op, who will be helping out with tech support. So if you have technical needs or any questions, you can definitely put those into the chat so they can try to help you out with that. Thanks very much to them for being here. We are recording this webinar. A recording will be available on the CMBA website, so you will have access to that afterwards, as well as a list of resources. So today, we will be doing a very brief overview of what cooperative housing is. So we'll go over some basic terms just for folks to be familiar with as we have our conversation. And then we will be talking with our panelists. We'll be talking about what the process of starting a housing co-op looks like from the initial organizing to moving in day. We'll be discussing some common challenges and strategies to overcome them. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. If you have questions, you'll be able to type those in the chat for the panelists and the hosts to see. I often like to suggest that folks hold off on typing in questions right away so that we don't lose track of them, maybe amid some more technical questions. But certainly feel free to get those into the chat and we will do our best to get to all of your questions. So we're going to start off with a brief overview of what cooperative housing is. So cooperative housing is a form of home ownership in which the residents of a property own and control the property together. The residents own membership shares in the cooperative corporation and thus become members of the co-op. Typically, not always, there are some exceptions which we'll talk about later, but typically they also lease their living units from the co-op. And members work together to make decisions about how the cooperative operates. They have control over their housing costs, over decisions about improvements that are made and how their housing operates. There are a few kind of basic financial structures for housing co-ops. And we're gonna, again, go over them. This is a very broad overview of these structures, just so folks can be familiar with the terms. There are market rate housing cooperatives. In this model, members buy and sell their shares on the open market. So individuals can claim and retain the equity or the value that accumulates on their shares. So typically these are fairly expensive shares. Members would need to have access to pretty good deal of money, or they would be required to take out a loan in order to purchase their shares. But there is also the opportunity for a lot of individual profit. This does mean, though, that the cost of the housing is typically more expensive, more subject to market fluctuations, and thus it's not considered as affordable for as many people. Next, there are limited equity housing cooperatives. This is maybe a more common model that we're seeing and maybe of more interest to folks. In this model, members can sell their shares for a small profit, but there's a limit. So they can earn some equity, but there is a limit to that equity, and a portion of the equity remains with the cooperative. So this allows for some individual profit, but it also helps to keep the housing costs affordable and membership more attainable for a larger number of folks. Still maybe not for very low income households, but definitely for more people, this would be attainable. And then there are group equity housing cooperatives. In this model, members buy and sell their shares at a set price and do not earn individual profits. So any equity remains within the co-op, which is run on a nonprofit basis and is used for the betterment of the housing and of the cooperative. This means that members are not earning an individual profit, but they are typically enjoying housing costs that are much lower than market rate. This means stable housing costs, and it means that membership in the cooperative is attainable to a larger number of folks, including those lower income households. Housing cooperatives can also look different from a physical standpoint from the actual housing. So if we move on to the next slide, please. There we go. There are housing cooperatives in apartment buildings. In this model, members would have their own individual apartments, which again, they would typically lease and pay monthly carrying charges on, sort of like a renter, and then would share and cooperatively manage common spaces of the building. So the lobby, the yard, the driveway, maybe a laundry room. There are housing cooperatives that exist in single family homes. So here members have their own individual bedrooms, and then they share all of the common living spaces of the home. There are also resident-owned communities, or ROCs, and this was one that I mentioned a few slides earlier. In a ROC, members live in manufactured homes, which they own individually. So here, the members own their individual home, and what is cooperatively owned and managed is the land that the homes sit on. This helps to protect members from sometimes really wild price increase for that land that manufactured home communities across the country are seeing pretty often. So the financial structure and the actual physical structure of the housing for housing co-ops, really, it's going to depend on the needs of the members. Also, potentially the access that the members and the cooperative have to funding. There will be, you know, if the price for the cooperative is not covered entirely by shares, by the membership shares, then the cooperative will need to have access to funding. If it is covered by the cost of the shares, then the members need to have access to that funding. Whatever form a co-op takes on, the common threads are going to be that cooperative decision-making and greater housing stability. Folks will have more power, more voice in making decisions about their housing, in deciding on how much it will cost to operate their housing, and on what benefits are going to be passed on to members. So again, that is just a very, very basic overview, just so folks have some common understanding of some terms. And I'm sure that we will get into more details of those as we get into conversation with our panelists, which we are going to do in just a moment after I introduce folks. So first with us today, we have bri.d.eng. Brian is a real estate investor with a community development problem. He enjoys his work because of the impact that buildings have on the communities around them. He and his partners, Liz Trice and Matt Peters at Maine Cooperative Development Partners, have approvals to build 90 limited equity cooperative homes in Portland. They hope to build the first phase of 22 homes in 2026. Brian has also served on the board of the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, one of the most longstanding and well-respected organizations developing and supporting limited equity housing cooperatives since 2019. Second, we have Margaret Jones of Mountainside Community Cooperative in Camden, Maine. Margaret serves as board president, a member of Maine Rock Strong as part of the Maine advocacy team, currently serving as Rock Association New England director, and serves on 3 Rock Association committees. Margaret is currently overseeing 2 $4.6 million infrastructure projects for her 70-year-old community and is a member of the Maine Manufactured Housing Board. During her corporate career, Margaret served as a project manager, productivity monitor, development, implementation, and field support for automated maintenance and inventory systems in the corporate equipment engineering of a major global container shipping company. She also spent 10 years in systems engineering with the air pollution control industry, providing major air cleaning equipment for such clients as United States Steel. Since becoming part of a resident-owned community, she has dedicated her efforts to the importance of raising the perception of manufactured housing communities and advocating for level playing fields for this valuable source of responsible and affordable home ownership. And third, we have Thumbs, who is a co-founder of one of Maine's newest affordable housing co-ops, the Collaborative Living Cooperative in Belfast, Maine, which currently houses 6 adults and 2 children. He is also a co-founder of the Intentional Community Curious series and the Healing and Community podcast series. He has spent the last 15 years living in community projects across North America and continues to be obsessed with going deeper into village life. So thank you so much to all 3 of you for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation. The 3 of you collectively bring a wealth of knowledge and experience. So this is going to be great. So the first question, and I think we'll start with Thumbs, and then Brian and Margaret can pipe in too. What are the first steps a group should take to start a housing co-op?
Cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so glad to be here and hopefully help create more housing co-ops in Maine. So thank you all for attending. And the first steps that I would see is learning facilitation and conflict resolution. These are really core to working together. Um, I feel like our whole society would be quite a different place if everybody had like a fundamental education on how to facilitate a nourishing, invigorating meeting that led to the higher power of the collective, that really unlocked the wisdom that is in this special group of people in this moment. And I see facilitation as just an incredibly powerful tool for unlocking the collaborative potential of a group of people. So learning facilitation, there's many ways to do it, but having that, not assuming that you are just gonna, because you get along, because you love each other, that you have a shared vision, that you're so similar, that you're going to be able to make meetings an enjoyable experience. So start with some facilitation training. I'll share resources about that later. And then paired with that facilitation training is conflict resolution and emotional hygiene tending, because that's another core skills. As you start working together, kind of no matter what your proximity is from each other, whether you're going to be living in the same house or in multiple houses or in a large apartment complex, like working on something that you care about this much is going to lead to conflict, and that conflict can create deeper connection and more meaningful relationships, or it can cut your whole project short just because you disagreed about like the preferred color of a kitchen space. Like such simple things can end up tearing down a project because conflict and emotional hygiene weren't tended and learned by the group. So I could say more, but I'll just start with learning facilitation and conflict resolution will be a good start.
Thank you so much. Margaret, what would you say are the first steps a group should take?
Well, I have to agree with Thumbs that conflict resolution is very important. I think the first step is to gather together as a group and decide whether or not you want to do this. And then as you go along, forming a good set of governance, an interim board, buy-in from the community. When we're talking about 52 individual homeowners with our situation. And it was a matter of everybody saying, yes, we'd like to explore this, then building a good, strong governance, an interim board, committees to all work together, who hopefully had good conflict resolution skills, and our bylaws, rules, and policies also supported that. Because then there's a long journey to pull it all together.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think? What are the first steps?
Absolutely. In addition to everything that's already been mentioned, I think just sort of understanding the financial ramifications of what you're planning to undertake, and there's sort of two sets of financial the work that needs to be done. One is, what will it cost to create the co-op, whether you're, acquiring or building or doing whatever, what are the costs that are involved to get started? And then you also need to think about what will the ongoing operating costs be over time. So it's really important, I think, to build a financial framework and have an understanding of those two costs, sort of the upfront costs and then the ongoing operating costs as well. And then, once you have sort of a reasonable picture of what money is required, then you get into the question of where you're going to find that money, which can be very difficult with co-ops because it is a little bit of a, certainly in Maine, it's a more unusual structure, and banks and lawyers and other folks or financing agencies like Maine Housing are less familiar with it. Municipalities are less familiar with it too. So there's often a lot of sort of education that needs to be done. But I think that getting a feasible financial framework together as you're organizing and coming together as a cooperative group is obviously crucial to success.
Thank you. And Brian, maybe you can start off by talking a little more about what that journey looks like from that initial organizing to kind of securing that funding to actually moving in.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think people have said it's a long road, and just a little bit of background. I mean, I'm currently working on a ground up, like, new construction 90 home limited equity housing cooperative in Portland. And we've been working in collaboration with the city of Portland. They've been great supporters of our project. They basically donated the land to us to do it, which is a huge financial commitment that the city has made. They've also provided commitments for additional financial support, both for construction of the cooperative, and then they're intending to sort of leave that money in there to help make the entry point into the cooperative, the share purchase for the residents, affordable. So they've been a great advocate for us, but it's been a long road. I mean, it's taken. We started this process with the city in 2020, and like I said, we hope to be under construction in 2026. We are not there yet. So it has been a 6-year road. And we've had a lot of interested people, sort of on our list, and we've been engaging with them. But again, just pulling the numbers together, in a way that's financially feasible, and figuring out where we're going to get the funds to do it has been a real challenge. So I think you have to be doing, you have to be sort of parallel processing those activities if you want this to be successful. And again, we hopefully will be, sort of 6 years into it by the time we start our construction next year.
Be a long process.
Absolutely.
So Thumbs and Margaret, you both bring different perspectives. Brian has sort of this developer perspective. Margaret, from your perspective for a rock, what does that journey look like from organizing to folks? I mean, I think folks typically in Iraq would be already moved in, but from actually becoming a co-op.
Right. Ours was an existing community. And so after our initial decision as a community that, yes, we wanted to explore this, then you have to do a detailed property condition report. You have to be taking into account the actual cost of the property, what needs to be forming a capital improvement plan to take care of those things that were brought up in that condition report that need to be taken care of, and the day-to-day running of the cost of the day-to-day running of the community. And you follow through, and you start to get this larger picture of exactly what Brian was talking about. What is it going to cost you to run your community? And with a rock, everyone is involved, not just that board that sits out there. Because as you go through this process and you make these decisions, you make them as a community. And that information is brought together in meetings, it's discussed. Maybe this group brings in this piece, this group brings in this piece. The person who's walking you through the acquisition process brings a very large piece. And the community votes as it goes along. Do they want to continue? Do they want to go in this direction? And by the time you end up going to closing, you have really an incredible set of governance, which a sense of working together, a real sense of community, and a governance which assists you all the way through, in even down to how do you deal with conflict? How do you, and everything is for the community, and what it costs us to run our community is exactly what every member is going to pay on a monthly basis for the land that's beneath their own home. And it's an amazing process. And if you can get it all right, it's just a great situation. When you get to that closing day and everybody's voted, yes, we want to take this through to the finish, there's a real sense of community, working together, being together, and ownership and stability.
It's amazing. A lot of work and a lot of rewards. How about for you, for kind of a sort of smaller scale co-op? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I don't know if the process feels any smaller scale, even though maybe the outcome is smaller scale. It's such an open-ended journey. Yeah, how do you find your purpose in life? It's kind of like a similar, there's just so many directions and things it might look like and places it might take you. So maybe in the meta process is just being patient, that if this is really what your soul is yearning for, if like, being in this relationship with other people and relationship with land and creating this is what your heart is being called to do, then don't stop. And that journey could look like anything. And if you keep going, it will almost definitely arrive at something beautiful. So keep going. And I would add to that journey is going on that journey is really powerful with the people you want to create things together with, go and visit projects that exist and other people who are doing it, who are a few steps ahead of you, whether they're a little ahead of you or way ahead of you, and find that camaraderie, so that it's not just, you and whoever's at the table, but it's you and the bigger movement. Check.
Awesome, thank you. I'm noticing a couple of questions in the chat so far. So one is about resources. There'll be some resources in the chat, and there'll be a list of resources that accompany the video later online for folks. And we'll be asking panelists again specifically about resources a little later. I also see a question here in the chat about sweat equity. And so in terms of coming together and contributions that may help with feelings and egos and being hands-on, are there any ways to involve co-op members with the construction or with purchasing co-op, purchase into the co-op with manual labor or some sort of other contribution? What are folks' thoughts on that? Margaret?
Well, in our particular resident-owned community, we are a volunteer community. And of course, all board members, all committee members, and all community members contribute what they can to the community. And all of that is at no cost to the community. That's their participation in the place that they live and they own. And it's, when we do a budget or when we do projects, we always come together and say, okay, what can we do for ourselves? Because I always have this thing of, okay, fine, it's going to cost X number of dollars. And okay, that means X number of dollars per household per month. How much do you want this, number one? Is it critical, number two? But then you got to do it anyway. And number three, how much can we do ourselves and save on that? And that builds community, it builds involvement, and it gets things done.
Brian and Thumbs, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, self-help is crucial. I mean, anything, whether it's, work that needs to be done up front or, that ongoing sort of operating of the co-op that you need to do, if you don't have to pay a third party, as Margaret said, then your maintenance costs are going to be lower and your initial costs to get up and running are going to be lower. And those are both good things. The organization that I serve on the board for, which I think is a great resource, and I guess I'll point everybody to it. It's the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, but it goes by UHAB, UHAB. So uhab.org is the website. That organization was born out of a self-help movement in New York back in the early 70s when landlords were abandoning buildings that had people living in them. And the city of New York sort of recognized the program. You had basically, the city was taking possession of these buildings and they were people's homes, people who lived there who had been, renting. And UHAB became an organization that helped those people organize and through sweat equity and finding, outside sources of funding where outside sources of funding were necessary, allowed the residents of those homes to become homeowners. And that's the legacy of UHAB. So a little bit of a pitch for UHAB there, both, for people who are just sort of curious about the movement in general. And, for folks who may be considering a particular project, UHAB was originally rooted in New York City and historically has been a New York City based organization, but they are involved with the project that I'm working on in Portland and are taking a much more national interest to supporting and developing housing cooperatives. So.
I would maybe, riff on what Margaret and Brian have shared is, to do the COA, it's like everyone's gonna be sweating to make it happen. It's like it's just so much effort that and the volunteer and everyone and pitching in and making the project come true is going to involve a lot of work that's outside of being paid for sure. And that having, our member dues, we're a group equity, affordable housing group equity co-op. So the member dues ends up being $100 to become a member of the project. And to try and make that low enough that most people could cover it if they're excited to join. And then we have, certain amount of expectation of how you're going to show up. And then above that is just as much as your capacity can offer. And embracing what can happen and what we need to pay for, that we just don't have the time to take care of ourselves is humbling also. Check.
Yeah. And in terms of cooperative startup, specifically, what are some of the most common challenges that you've seen or that you've encountered, and how have you seen groups work to overcome those challenges? And specifically, again, what's sort of that startup piece?
Shannon, did you pass that to me? Was that the prompt?
I've passed that to whoever would like to answer it first.
Okay, I'll run with it since I already stepped in. I'd say, losing momentum is a tough one because it is such a long journey and people get excited and they feel like they're on board. And like Brian just mentioned, they're 5 years in on his project, and I'm sure Margaret's was also a long journey. And it's just finding ways of making progress, finding wins, finding ways to start collaborating now, not having just the final, dream project manifestation being the only kind of checkpoint along the way, but celebrating all of the little checkpoints that you're going to be going through to get where you're going to end up is really vital, because it might be a multi-year journey, and you want to not give up on the process. And then I think another challenge is obviously financing, and I just want to put in a vote, obviously CFNE, but then also that microloans from, like, we're in an interesting time right now with a big transfer of wealth from the elder population of the United States, and finding ways to create agreements and loan contracts among the wider community of people, and just gathering everything from $1,000 to $10,000 to $50, $100+ thousand loans that are outside of the banking system. This is there's a lot of wealth transfer happening in our country, and there's a lot of contracts that can be made that will unlock some of that for your project to become one of the investments that people are doing with their portfolio. So encouraging creative microloan strategies. Check.
I think one of the critical things as you go into this goes right back to one of our startup things, and that is getting along, communications, a strong board with strong policies, behavioral policies, so that nobody takes the charge and runs, and you realize that you truly are all working together. And I think that even as you go into it's very important during the process, but it's equally as important once you've completed the process. And yes, you are a co-op. You have to have strong board training, strong community interactions, because if that board goes rogue, it's a real issue. Strong board training as to their duty of care and what they're really there for is very important to keep that community, or however, well, I'll just call it community because they're all different types of communities, moving along strongly and smoothly with everyone in mind.
Brian, any additional common challenges you see to add?
I mean, I think having a good sense of what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, there are very different things out there. There are ROCs, there are developer-led sort of new construction projects like the one that I'm working on. There are group equity efforts, cooperatives like Raise Up and Thumb, what Thumbs is talking about. You have co-housing versus just the housing project. I think knowing what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish, and getting that group of people together who are all pulling in the same direction is important. And then again, I just will go back, like, once you sort of have your idea, I think you really have to figure out, what it's going to cost, what it's going to cost to start. And then again, be thinking about, once you succeed on that, what it's going to cost to keep going. Because all the best ideas, if you can't pull together the resources to execute them, that ends up just being an idea. And I think that's and then that's my bias too. That's the hard part, and depending what your project is, like, it could be really simple from sort of a design and construction standpoint. Like, if you're just taking an existing home and trying to find other people to live there together under common principles, like, that might be something similar. But it just depends. So I think a little bit of work up front is super important, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and then you really just sort of have to start framing it out to see what it's going to take to bring that common goal into reality.
Thank you. Brian, you mentioned co-housing just a moment ago. And we have a question in the chat, and I'm wondering if you could maybe try to answer this one based on your knowledge. Are there communities like a rock community, but with built homes instead of mobile homes? So land shared, but the land is shared, but individuals finance their own dwelling. I'm wondering if you can answer that one a little bit. Maybe talk about co-housing a little bit and different models there.
Well, I think, I mean, there are all kinds of different flavors, right? And I noticed Haley just posted community land trusts into the comments, and I think that's the model and structure that probably most closely mimics, the question there. So that certainly is a established approach. So I think, the answer to that is yes. There are many different models. So depending on what the people want to accomplish together, again, this is where I think figuring out what you want and then deciding what the most appropriate structure or process is, a lot of it will flow from figuring out what you all together want. And I think that's, one of the most interesting different things about, cooperative housing creation that differs from other approaches, which are much more developer driven, obviously. And, ironically, the project I'm working on in Portland is a developer driven, developer led project. So ours, looks more like a traditional one. But I think co-housing in particular, that's a model where it is really about people really, having a shared vision, and wanting to intertwine their lives, I think, together in a way that's different than, say, people who live in a neighborhood together. This is, people who are really, wanting to be integrated into one another's lives. And I think that's the biggest difference. I think, the early raise up efforts, I think had a lot of that woven into it. And I gather that's what, Thumbs is living as well. So I think those are wonderful things. And I think those can often, I think they're often smaller scale, I think, sort of by necessity, because it's a lot harder when you're trying to intertwine your lives together, right? Like we're trying to do 90 homes to try to find 90 people who have, a shared vision for how they want to intertwine their lives. I think that's a lot harder than, say, finding 5, people or 10 people who might want to do it. And I think in those circumstances, often maybe someone has a house or a piece of land, that they're willing to be sort of to contribute in or figure out a way, to make that work. So I think, those types of undertakings, those types of cooperatives, I think often have an opportunity to get going a lot more quickly than say trying to figure out how to build 90 homes together, which I think at the end of the day, ours are not going to be co-housing. Maybe it will evolve that way, or maybe individual buildings within our community will evolve that way, because we are going to have multiple buildings with sort of anywhere from 4 to 10 homes in them. So maybe there will be buildings that will evolve that way, and people will be able to sort of accomplish that. But I think that's the beauty of this cooperative model. It takes on a lot of different shapes and forms.
I would just like to say that perhaps one of the things that people who are thinking about options, what can they do, is to go ahead and read those cooperative principles. And if they believe in those principles, there's probably a model to fit it. If not, invent one.
Yeah, and someone in the chat, folks have been mentioning community land trusts again, like Brian mentioned, and specifically Farming Artist in Blue Hill is an example of land owned collectively and member owners owning and sometimes building their own homes. So there are definitely, yes, a lot of options out there depending on what members are hoping to accomplish together and what needs they want to serve. We had a question. I'm gonna get back into the chat here. We have had a couple of questions about the number of housing co-ops in Maine and nationally. I do not know the answer to that question. And also a question about kind of growth rate compared to 10 or 20 years ago. I don't know if either of the three of you have those numbers right off the top of their heads, or maybe if Emmy has access to those numbers and can pop them in the chat for us. But it is definitely, I would say, a growing movement as people, get more invested and curious about having more control over their housing, and as the housing crisis continues and folks need better access to affordable, stable housing. We have a question in the chat. Oh, Margaret, yes.
No, I was just gonna say, I know there are 13 resident-owned communities here in the state of Maine, and that's just a small segment of cooperative housing.
Yes. Yeah, and rocks are really such a growing movement in the state and across the country.
We have everything from maybe 10 homes in a park to a couple hundred, so in a single community. So there's a lot of housing going on in those 13 rocks.
Incredible. I've lost it again. Where is my question I was looking at here? Let's see. Thinking about public support programs and what's needed to support this work best. I can think of grant making, but what about guidance support staff? So anything to say more about sort of those resources for grant making and also just for general guidance? I've already got some in the chat. Go ahead.
I know that as a resident-owned community, when you go through the acquisition, and of course you have a technical guide through that, but then with our particular community, we also have a technical advisor through CDA, our TA, which basically it's a process of, I often refer to it as taking, you raise your children to walk away and have wonderful lives, not to come back home after college. So that's what the TA advisor is, to kind of keep you on track, remind you of your bylaws, remind you when you're slipping in the wrong direction, offer suggestions when you come up with against a wall and go, ooh, what do I do with this? But all the time teaching you to stand on your own 2 feet and be your own community. Very important.
What was the original question about public support, Shannon? Was that the?
Yeah, both about, so I think there's a question both about grant making support and also just about guidance support staff for the process.
So both the financial and the technical assistance. I think Thumbs had mentioned the Cooperative Fund of New England. I saw Chris Linder's on the list. They are both, I think, great for obviously financial, but also technical assistance. You have the Cooperative Development Institute as well. They provide a lot of technical assistance and potentially some, I don't think they do a lot of financial work with housing cooperatives, but they provide technical assistance. I will mention, my organization that I serve on the board again, UHAB does both, both financial work and technical assistance work. So I think there are a lot of resources out there, and Raise Up, your organization, Shannon, very much in the sort of technical assistance space directly, but I think also highly influential in trying to come up with developing new financial sources as well. And I give Raise Up a lot of credit for that, for doing a lot of work cooperatively, not just for themselves, but for the whole movement. I think in the 5 years that I've been working on our project, we're seeing Maine housing really coming around, and they're getting involved with, I think, really thinking about resident-owned communities. I think Margaret could probably, maybe attest to that. And I saw Erica Quinn Easter from the Genesis Fund, another organization that's both a financing organization, has done a ton of work with Rocks, has supported us in our work, and they also provide technical assistance and sort of interface with Maine Housing. So these are all organizations that are doing it. I'm encouraged in my 5-year journey in this work that I think the momentum is building and people are trying to work harder together. I will give Kennebunk Savings a shout out. They recently made a commitment to our development, our Lambert Co-op development as a senior lender, and that's a bank. I mean, that's in my mind is sort of the most radical thing imaginable. So I'm thrilled about their commitment to doing the work. There are other they're called CDFIs. I think community development financial institution, I think is what that stands for. Chris or Erica, from CFNE, and Genesis can correct me in the chat if I got the acronym wrong, but there are others who are involved in that work as well and who have been supporting us. So I think there's some foundations, I think, out there as well that thanks, Chris, out there as well who are interested in this work. So it's exciting. I mean, it's a lot different in 2025 than it was in 2020 when we took our first step on this path. And so I'm optimistic and grateful.
I'd like to add that one of the big challenges for resident-owned communities for manufactured housing is that here in the state of Maine, my 1,500 square foot home is considered basically a chattel loan. That's all you can get. Our local bank was certainly willing to give us the loan to purchase the entire community, but they will not finance a person building a home. And one of the big strides that we all need to work for is to work with the traditional banking industry to understand that these are not your crazy out there that somebody's going to hook it up and drive it away. These are secure, stable homes that deserve, you're going to tax them like real estate, let them get a mortgage like a regular piece of real estate. That's my little soapbox.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a good point. And we had a question about that, about what gaps or what expansion we need to see on the public side for supports. What any big gaps in supports and financing that you have seen that you would like to see improve or that you have ideas for?
The gaps, I can't speak as much from the state level. I guess I'm very grassroots oriented. And maybe one gap that I love seeing filled, so as a positive one, is one that maybe this also relates to the sweat equity question earlier, is just gathering your wider community of people who maybe don't live in the project but are still want to believe in the project, whether they're in a sister project or whether they're just kind of believe in collective living and cooperative living, and finding ways to all come together and do gardening or home repair or a fundraiser, and that grassroots network of allies is really invigorating to vulnerably just reach out and be like, hey, we need a hand repainting our house. Like, are you available? And then it becomes a whole uplifting experience. So just noting that, yeah, having vulnerability in reaching out to the wider community can lead to really incredible results.
Thank you. I did see a question here. First of all, Emmy put into the chat for us, there are 19 known official housing co-ops in Maine currently. And then we also had a question about, let's see, have you come across formations where educational bridges are a priority? So generational gaps, cultural challenges seem like an opportunity. Cultivations in more ways than one. For example, any live work co-ops for the youth. Folks have any knowledge of that work happening?
Not really a youth live work element, but I will talk about our project and the fact that we are using this limited equity model and we're structuring it in a way where we want to offer a home ownership opportunity that will sit outside of the traditional mortgage market, which is, you know, notoriously difficult to navigate, where when you're required to go out and get an individual mortgage from a bank, there's, you know, it's just such a hurdle. And so the way that we've planned our project and the way we're working on it together is we really are trying to make it accessible and not require people you know, to have a mortgage. We want the entry point to be something that's manageable. And we are collaborating with organizations like the Quality Housing Coalition and Prosperity Maine, you know, here in our area to work with them to try to bring people who traditionally, you know, we're looking for a lot of first generation home buyers. I mean, I'll just say it. We want people who come from a family that has no history of home ownership. And we want to you know, make this something that's very manageable and take that, you know, whole mortgage approval process out of the equation. So I think in those ways, that's something that's true on the project that I'm working on. But I think, you know, Chris, I think also nodded to that artist project. So I think that certainly is a thing. And you know, I don't think we have any of these in Maine, but there are other examples. Naturally, someone else, I think, had posted a comment about people who might want to, you know, grow some of their own food on the cooperative as well. So I think all of these things are certainly possible. And again, it's just, again, step one that we've talked about is finding that group of people who want to put their shoulder, you know, to the wheel together to make this happen. And then again, figuring out how much it's going to cost and where that money is going to come from, or where the sweat equity is going to come from. And like, is it feasible? I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing about this model is it's all possible for sure.
You. Let's see, it's just about time to wrap up. This has been an incredible discussion. Any closing thoughts from the three of you? Last ideas or inspirations that you'd like to leave us with?
I did see one question in the comments about fairness involved. And as with anything, people are people. And as you enter this, yes, you want 100%. Yay, team, let's go. But you know what? In any group of people, there are going to be those who can and do, those who can't but appreciate. And you have to read your crowd.
Very important. Thumbs and Brian, any closing thoughts for us?
I mean, I'm all about the broken record. But you know, I think figuring out, you know, what it's going to take, you know, for equity, money, or sweat equity, whatever it's going to take. Like the sooner you get like a handle on what that's going to be. I mean, I think that's super important. So I know I've said it before. It's not necessarily a closing thought other than to reiterate that. I mean, having someone in your group who's good at sort of organizing, like, you know, in that way, you know, sort of organizing, you know, here's how much money we need or how much effort we're going to need if we want to put sweat equity instead. I think that's just such a key and crucial first step. And I think if you can come to a consensus about that as a group, I think, and figure that out, I think that's probably going to increase your probability of success dramatically. So that would be my bit of advice.
Can I add one word to what Brian just said? Critical. That's critical.
Yeah, I really love these sage nuggets at the end. I would add to it to also to not give up and to celebrate what you've already achieved with what community you already have, whatever co-op you're developing. I'm sure there's already some level of community around you that is thriving and working, and maybe you're not all the way where you want to go, but you still have something worth celebrating and finding celebrating what you already have along the way, and being patient, that just because the journey's long doesn't mean that it's the wrong path. It's good to remember.
And a bit of wisdom from you have experience in New York, you know, doing this for over 50 years with people who are first generation homeowners who come from, you know, very sort of non-traditional backgrounds. I think if you do succeed, it's gonna thrive. So.
Thank you all so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate all three of you being here to join us. Thank you for all of the wonderful questions and suggestions in the chat. So we have contact information here for myself and the three panelists. Emmy has put a link in the chat to a feedback survey. So please, if you can, take the time to fill that out. That helps us to keep improving these webinars. The next webinar in this series will be in 2 weeks on October 22nd at 11 o'clock. So we will be discussing maintaining and growing existing housing co-ops. And then we'll continue the conversation about cooperative housing on October 29th for the third webinar, Inspiring Stories and Impact Housing Co-ops and Beyond. So again, thank you just so much to everyone for being here. We hope that you gained some knowledge. Again, that list of resources will be available. I know it was a lot that went into the chat. There are a lot of resources out there, a lot of information, a lot to think about. And we wish you luck if you are on a co-op journey. And I hope that everyone has a really wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye for now.